Welcome to the March 15th, 2023 Brookline School Committee Finance Subcommittee. Let me pull up the agenda. First item is, we're not doing minutes this time, we'll do minutes next time. So acceptance of grants and gifts. We have one gift to consider. And I'm just going to, sorry, pull up the files. Got it. So there's one gift from Chestnut Hill Realty with a value of $10,387.76. This is for some equipment for the Baker School playground, some benches, 4 benches, 4 picnic tables, and 1 2-row 24-foot bleacher. The subcommittee received a memo to the superintendent from Matt Gillis, and recommending receipt and basically saying that the materials, that the sort of location and the materials and everything had been jointly agreed upon by all parties, including the principal, town staff, etc. So it seems like a nice thing for the school. And do we have any questions, or does someone want to move favorable action? I'll move favorable action. Suzanne, are you a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Andy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Nancy, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Thank you very much. And thank you to Chestnut Hill Realty for this small gift. Today, bleachers, tomorrow, something even more expensive that Chestnut Hill Realty can help support.
I should have asked, do they put a little tag on it or a little plaque or something, or?
I do not know, Matt. Do you know, does it carry some sort of gift acknowledgement?
They didn't mention it, but if they want one, I'll make sure to get a picture or a rendering, send it before the committee. If if they, because oftentimes I think people see with benches like who donated or who it's in memory from.
So Matt, just to remember, our policy book says you cannot put like the Dunkin' Donuts whatever. So it can't be the Chestnut Hill Realty donation. It can be from the person.
Right, okay.
But not from the business.
Understood. I'll let them know. They didn't mention it, so I don't think they were.
Yeah, I think it's better not to have anything and just say thank you.
Okay.
Sorry,
I can do a thank you letter.
Yes, everyone gets thank you letters, so that's good. Next item on the agenda is the FY24 budget development. We have 3 things in this section, but Ruth, if it's okay with you, do you mind if we actually flip the FY23 school lunch discussion first?
Nope, that's fine.
Okay. So if everyone recalls, the last time we met, there was discussion of the FY24 budget, and we talked about making second lunch free for free and reduced lunch as well. And then we talked about retroactively applying that to FY23. And the school committee voted to do those things, right, Betsy? We did, right? Vote to do both of those things? I know we voted on the FY24 fees, and now I'm misremembering. Did we actually vote on FY23 too?
No, the retroactive vote will be tomorrow night on the 16th.
Okay, right. So then this was the opportunity to just get data from Ruth on the sort of the implications of this. Go ahead, Ruth, whenever you're ready.
Well, actually, I can't call it up, but there was some documentation that was sent to you in terms of a recap of what I had gotten from Sasha. And if you'll hold on 1 second, so I can call it up on my other screen here.
I don't think I got that. Did we get that?
The memo, yeah, let me.
Yeah, we got that.
Yeah,
Did we?
Becky sent it out.
My goodness, I missed it then?
I think I just
the
got it
second meal
today.
analysis. I'm sorry. Yes, okay, go ahead. I can pull it up if you want, Ruth. Would you like me to pull it
Yep,
up on the screen?
that
Okay.
would be great. Yep, thank
Andy
you.
just
Give
did
me
it.
one. Oh,
I
someone
think
did.
Andy's already done it.
Andy
Oh.
just did it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. So I had gotten some information from Sasha, and then I went through and I did the analysis of the actual second meals that students had that are considered reimbursable second meals, as opposed to those other types of meals that they don't meet the components of the USDA in order to be considered reimbursable. So the actual second meals are in the first column on that on the document that you're looking at right now. And it's broken down by total by school and between the breakfast and the lunch for the total reimbursable. The next three columns are the a la carte, the non-reimbursable meals, and snacks. So those amounts are again not reimbursable under the federal guideline, even if a child takes a reimbursable meal first, because they don't have the components in them that are required under the USDA to meet the reimbursable guidelines. And so I also included a little in the cover memo, there was a little blurb that came off of the Department of Ed website that just basically talks about the sort of the goal of the school nutrition and making the healthy students eating healthy act, or and about school nutrition. And I also included it voted in I guess it was just about a year ago in 2022, the recap of the various components in the school lunch. So those final three columns, as you can see down at the bottom, they do not meet the nutritional standards and nutritional guidelines in order to be reimbursed. And with student lunch, you can't force a student to take a reimbursable lunch. You have to offer the student the lunch. You can't serve the student the lunch. So sometimes the student might not want to take the fruit or the vegetable, and the minute they don't do that, then the lunch becomes non-reimbursable.
So this is really helpful. Thank you, Ruth, for breaking out all the costs. Based on the school committee's discussion, there's the finance subcommittee's discussion, I think we're talking about waiving the $5,443 amount as opposed to the entire $6,200 amount. But I want to get the sense of the committee of what we're recommending to the full committee. I personally, I see that there's a gap here, and my thinking is that we somehow wipe the old debt, but make clear that going forward that the debt is like that we would waive the entire 6231, but that going forward we're not going to waive snacks, because maybe if you knew you were going to have to pay for it, you might have picked a snack because it was cheaper. Whereas if you knew you could have had an option to have a free second meal, you might order the whole second meal. Like kids might be picking the cheapest option, is I guess what I'm trying to say. But I'm curious what your opinion is on that, and also, of course, what the subcommittee members, how we want to proceed with this.
Well, the one thing I didn't say is that the first column, that's from February, from September through February, just so that you have the time frame with that. And one of the other things that you asked, Mariah, is if we would leave it in the school lunch account or move it into the financial assistance account. And I think at this point, let's leave it in the school lunch account until we're through the whole year, and depending on what the school committee decides to do, and we'll take a look at the balance in the school lunch account and then move it at the end of the fiscal year before we close out the books. In terms of what you're saying in terms of waiving those things and then letting the students know that if they choose a snack or if they choose not to take the full lunch, I think that's a great idea. It may encourage students to, in fact, take a full lunch, take the fruit and the vegetable or whatever it is that they're not opting to take. And then that does, in fact, give them the opportunity to get a second free meal.
Thanks, Ruth. Other comments from the subcommittee? Go ahead, Suzanne.
Yeah, so if this is through February, would we expect it to be half of what it will be for the year?
It's probably slightly more than half for the year.
Okay. Okay. It's really confusing for the kids to know what's what's free and what's not. I don't know how we can make that easier, but the kids just aren't going to know. You're saying if they take a full second meal, they get that for free?
If they're, well, that's what the school committee is contemplating voting, the full second meal would be free.
Right.
That's the
Oh.
current policy, Suzanne, on their first meal too. So it's not that
Right,
the
no, I
second
know
policy,
that. Yeah,
nothing's
well-
different from their current practice.
So if they would want a second meal free, their first meal would have to be the full compliant meal in order for the second meal to be free. So what's
And the
happening?
second meal would have to be two, right? Ruth, the
Correct.
second meal would also have to be.
The second meal
Why?
would also
Why?
be compliant with the USDA standards in order for the second meal to be free.
So what happens?
I don't think
if
that's
you-
true though, Ruth, for the kids who are, if you're on free and reduced lunch, do we make them take the full, like, do they have to take the full compliant meal? We're not going to be seeking, are we seeking reimbursement from, I guess we're seeking reimbursement no matter whether they're free, reduced or not, right?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
So
But you-
can we give them the full meal and then, if they don't eat all of it, they put it on the table for seconds for those who want it or something? I mean, so,
Well, but see, that's where you get into, you can't force a meal on the student.
right,
It's, as I said, it's offer versus serve. You can offer the student the meal. So this is what is offered. The menu is designed to be a USDA compliant meal.
right,
So it will have some type of a protein, a fruit, a vegetable, and a milk or non-fat milk or something. And that's what can be offered to the student. Now, the student can opt to take that or can say, no, I want everything except, I don't want the fruit or I don't want the vegetable that day.
yeah, I know. We used to just give them the whole meal, and then if there was an orange they didn't want to eat, that would go on the table, that was up for grabs for anybody who wants it. I'm just saying, that's what they do.
Matt,
in
the
school.
schools have give back tables though, right? Again, this year, I know we weren't doing it for a while during COVID, but isn't there the like food return table in the cafeterias again?
I'd have to double check, but to the main point, we do encourage, especially at the elementary level, for the kids to take a complete meal. So we've got apples and raisins and, other things, right there at the checkout line. And we'll pretty much, we're pretty assertive with that. But with the high school kids, they know what they want and what they don't want. And it's sort of not worth the effort, but we do try to encourage the full meal. We also, if kids wanted, and they bought lunch and they wanted an additional fruit or vegetable because they were still hungry, we've always made that, since I've been here, that's been available to them at no charge. It's a la carte items. It's the second slice of pizza that we usually wind up charging for it. I understand why folks would want to waive the fee sort of retroactively, but I find it a little odd that we'd be encouraging a full second meal if kids really just wanted another apple or something. You know what I mean? So I'm still just trying to wrap my head around the functionality of it to keep it simple and understandable. And Ellen's been waiting, so I'll stop talking.
Thank you, Matt. So first of all, can I just do an aside? We were at Baker, Nancy Gorer and I this morning, and we went through the lunch, and it looked fantastic. I was almost ready to sit down and have lunch. Just the way it was displayed and the food that was there, it looked very fresh, and the fruits at the end were really nice, bananas and pears. So anyway, that's aside. I don't understand something. The first lunch is free. Fine. It's free for everybody as long as you take a full lunch, right? Is what you're saying.
It's for those students who qualify for free and reduced.
Well, now there's nobody's paying, right?
Well, because right now there's this state reimbursement, and that the state is actually footing the bill, and then there's the bill that has been introduced by the legislature to make that permanent.
Okay. So, but for the state, they only pay for the first meal, correct?
Correct.
And the second meal, it doesn't matter if you take just a few things or if you take a full meal, we're paying for it if somebody's still hungry.
Correct.
Well,
So
not,
why would
not
we would-
necessarily, Helen,
No.
because this is the policy that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I
we-
get it, but I'm
yeah.
not sure why we would have somebody take a full meal. Let's say they're still a little hungry, they want another, well, Matt
I
said.
guess maybe it's my misunderstanding of, like, is the a la carte and snacks always healthy? Or are we saying to someone, you don't have to eat an apple and a sandwich, you can have an ice cream cone? Like, and I know an ice cream cone is probably like an egregious example, but I guess my question is, do we have the exact same nutritional sort of well-roundedness in the snacks and a la carte as we do in the type A meal?
We try, but it's not as popular. Like common items at the elementary are goldfish crackers and graham crackers. That's probably not as nutritional as any piece of fruit. But
Right.
sometimes the kids want to crunch like that instead of carrot sticks and celery sticks.
And a la carte means basically, what is a la carte as opposed to snack? Sorry if I should know this.
There are some items, about 8 to 10 that would be offered for sale, but we really haven't had too much of it because all first lunches were free.
Okay.
It's the older kids, I think, in general, that are still hungry or that might have after school activities. And the most common thing is probably pizza day, where they come back and they want a second slice of pizza.
And pizza's an a la carte.
Yeah, if you just get a slice, it's an a la
Okay.
carte.
And
Yeah.
snacks is like graham crackers and
Right, yeah. Those are all la carte items as well.
But they have already gotten pizza in the full package for their first meal. They're
Correct.
coming back and they just want a second piece of pizza. So
That's correct.
That's a pretty common return for the middle school and high school kids.
Mariah's internet suddenly went down, so I will call on Nancy.
Hold on. Hi, can't we just make this easy and just for snacks that are not that nutritious? They're always a la carte, we always charge for them, so to speak, even if it's something small. And then everything else is, allowable. Fruit, when we went to the baker school today, I didn't see a single thing other than what kids had brought from home that looked not nutritious. The salad bar was fresh and the entree was brown rice. The sandwiches were all safe. There was like a cheese plate with cheese cubes, blueberries, like whole wheat crackers. I was blown away. Hell, I was ready to say, Helen, are you hungry? So maybe it's just a question of reorganizing what that is. And if somebody does pull a packet of goldfish crackers or something, like there's somebody that they have to pay or something like that. I just feel like to leave the cashier up to guessing as to, oh, I don't know, is that your first, is that your second? That's a lot to ask.
The cashier isn't typically guessing. They know what's a reimbursable meal, what
Oh.
defaults as an a la carte item, what is an a la carte item, and they will often remind the kids, to remind your parents to put some money on your account in a polite way without calling out a student. So the cashiers know what's a reimbursable meal and what's not. They get a lot of training on it, and we get audited by the state when they come to visit us every 2 or 3 years to make sure we're doing it correctly.
I just feel like we're complicating things. Maybe things should just be reorganized. Again, maybe I'm oversimplifying, so I'm sorry if I'm speaking out of turn. Forgive me. I just think if we're moving in this direction of allowing the kids to have more, we need to make it easier somehow instead of being a guessing game or a surprise if a charge shows up. I guess that's my 2 cents.
And I apologize that my internet is fading in and out. We've had trouble at work since the storm yesterday. It seems to be every so often kicking out. What do people think about having free and reduced? So the second lunch is free plus a la carte, the second a la carte item. and the, what was the other category? Sorry, as well as the non-reimbursable meal, and just leaving snack as a paid thing. That snack only represents $94, I think, of the total 6,200. And it seems to me like it's the sort of, like if you're hungry, you could have an a la carte pizza or something, or apple, something that's sort of from the more standard.
I agree. I say, let them have it. If the kids are hungry, we should feed them.
But not necessarily the goldfish. Or we leave it and we say it's goldfish too. I feel like if you get 3 goldfish packets, does that count? It feels like it's getting a little confusing.
Yeah, that's,
And the non-reimbursable meals and the a la carte items feel a little bit more clear to me. Andy, go ahead.
When we voted on the fiscal year 24 version of this at school committee, what exactly did we approve then? Maybe we should make this consistent with that.
I think we're going to have to make it consistent
Either
going
way,
forward.
by
We're gonna have to-
changing that or by adjusting
We're going to
this.
do it. I think we're going to do it for FY23, and then we're going to retroactively forward. We're going to, we have to adjust our vote, I think, on
Oh,
that.
all right.
Clarify our vote, clarify our
Do we
vote.
even remember what we voted?
We
for
basically
24?
voted to have the second meal free, but
But
Ruth's
not the,
additional.
but not the rest.
We didn't talk about a la carte versus non-reimbursable meals.
Okay.
So, or I believe we even said, we said the second type A meal. We didn't say non-reimbursables and we didn't say a la carte. So we'd have to clarify that any one of those 3 counts. So are people, is the subcommittee willing to do a recommendation? And if so, is it everything minus snacks is free as a second thing? Or does the subcommittee want to do something else? How about this? I'm going to make that motion and we'll see if I get a second. And if I don't, then someone else can make a motion.
I second it.
Okay. Andy, how do you vote?
Oh, yes.
Suzanne?
I think I vote yes. I'm still confused, but I guess we'll try it.
Okay.
So what? Okay.
Did you have a question?
Well, so for $94, we're going to charge for snack? I mean, is that what you're saying?
No, well, that's a good point, which is I think we should wipe out that retroactive debt, but going forward, so the $94 would also get wiped, but going forward, basically kids will say, you can have all these other things, but these limited few things, the like, you've got the graham crackers and goldfish as Matt described them, which I think is sort of helpful for illustrating the concept. Those things would still be paid, but apples, sort of regular meal things are all free.
So they would have apples out as a snack and that wouldn't cost, but if they go.
I think there's a separate little snack area, right, Matt? Like, isn't there an area where
I
these
don't know
other
how
things
snacks
are?
are sold, I guess.
So we used to do share tables. We had stopped. I can't say for sure what every kitchen is doing, where people would put their, apple that they didn't want on the table and another kid could grab it, but that was pre-pandemic.
But that's not what we're asking about. We're asking how are snacks like the goldfish and graham crackers, are they on a separate, like when you go to buy stuff, are they obviously not like with the apples? Are they separated on some sort of thing? So it's clear which things are considered snacks to kids versus the rest of it?
It's a little different in each cafeteria, so no, we would have to structure it in a way to do that. So like one example is like yogurt can be part of a meal component. Sometimes kids will just get a yogurt to add to their own lunch, right? So that would be an a la carte item, but if they get the yogurt parfait meal, which is an option at times, then no, it's part of the reimbursable meal because they're taking a whole meal and not buying a singular item.
This is tricky.
I don't think we have this worked out yet, to tell you.
It's not, the kids know it better than we do. I mean, we try to encourage that they take a reimbursable meal and there's different options to get there so that it's simpler.
So would staff know clearly what a snack is and be able to redirect a kid towards like, okay, this thing is a paid thing?
Yeah, they can, and I think they do sometimes, but depending on the kid, because they get to know the kids and you know, if the parent has $100 on the kid's account and the kid routinely buys a snack several days a week, they're probably not gonna bother to say anything. When the kid's balance is over, they might say, oh, just remind your parents that, you know, and they say it in a nice way. We really haven't gotten any, you know, complaints about it. It's, and
Why don't
we
we
send
do-
out, we send out invoices, and we've had, parents have been pretty good at paying compared to where they were in the past.
But the other thing is we didn't want to separate kids out who would have to pay and can't pay. So now we're up at the counter and they know that this child's a free and reduced lunch person. They just somehow know that, even though it's unclear this year how they would know that. But then if they want to take a snack, then the cashier would say, well, that one's going to cost money and you don't have anything on your account. I mean,
Well, here's the,
They don't say that. They don't deny the kid the food. They tell them to remind their parents to put some money on account.
well, I know, but
And-
the parents can't do that. That suddenly they're
here's what I
Then-
think. We're wiping out $6,000+ in debt. And we're talking about wiping out close to an equivalent amount, assuming practice carries going forward. I think that we should do it without the snacks and see where we end up at the end of the year. And then if we need to make another decision, if it's probably going to, we're talking about, it was $100 almost for the first 6 months of the year, and it's going to be in, maybe we've got 4 more months, then we're talking about maybe $50 or $60 here, assuming practice continues. And then we can just, and then probably that would just get wiped. But let's go ahead with the decision plus snack. And even if nothing gets said to those kids and they still buy them, again, this is a small amount of money, which we can decide if there's a big issue here, but we've wiped out 99 or 98% of the school lunch debt for these families based on the second meal plus the a la carte and the other stuff. We'll have wiped out 100% of it going backwards. And probably we're talking about $40 across the district if we keep the snack debt going forward. So,
okay. So
Suzanne,
yeah, well, so that's good, but I'd like us to really look at what's happening the second half of the year with around the snack, because again, the whole point was not to, have people, have kids separated from the whole. I mean, if
they won't be though, because every kid gets reminded if their system is, if they're negative. That's the whole point. It's not just these kids.
I know, but it's a lot of pressure. If the kid gets negative and he knows that his mom doesn't want to hear that he owes money, it's a problem. It's kind of an equity issue.
So do you want to wipe out snack debt going forward too?
I guess I'd like it. Yeah, if it's only 40 or 50 bucks, I would, yeah. Is that what we're talking about? We're having this discussion over $50?
For this year?
Yeah, Helen has an idea.
Go for
Yeah,
it, Helen.
how much has come into the system from these extra snacks and stuff? What is the revenues in the food services account right now? Is it broken out by what the payments are?
But yes, we do track what comes in from state revenue and what comes in from sales.
Separately?
Yeah, they're two separate revenue line items. I haven't looked at it since January.
And what was it in January?
The town, it was less than what we knew it was because the treasurer's office was behind in posting payments.
Oh,
So we hadn't had October and November and December posted when I looked at it, and the treasurer's office said they were behind. But we can track what comes in from the state because we can log in and see what the state wired for payments, and we knew what we made for deposits when parents, send in checks.
Let's do this. I'm gonna withdraw my motion and let's do it with the snacks through the end of the year. And we're gonna make a plan at the very start of the next fiscal year to come back and look at some of these details.
Yeah.
And then if we need to make any adjustments, we'll also hopefully know at that point what the state, we should know for sure, if the state is doing free and reduced lunch again, which by the way, Brookline was the signatory on the letter to the governor asking for the continuation of that program. So we can we can then revisit this and perhaps in a holistic sense. Not that we would change our plan for doing second lunch free, but we might again, we'll clarify and expand exactly what we mean based on FY23 data. So I'm withdrawing my motion. The revised motion is wiping out the debt going backwards for this year. And then for the rest of the year, the materials, these 4 categories are free for free and reduced lunch students. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay, Suzanne, how do you vote?
I vote yes, thank you.
Nancy,
I vote yes.
Andy?
Yeah.
And I vote yes. Okay. So thank you for that conversation. And then again, we'll come back at the very beginning of the next fiscal year once the close has happened to figure out how we want to proceed on that.
You know, may I just suggest, Myra, that not only we work with Sasha on this and Matt, but maybe Donna, who's the food manager at Pierce, has a good sense of things. I don't know, maybe get some input from them. I think it's just extremely confusing. And we want to make it as simple as possible. So
sounds good.
Get some input from them. Thanks.
Okay, and thank you, Ruth, for preparing that document. That was really helpful to see. So now we're going to go to FY24 budget development. There's 3 items on the agenda. The first one is building rental fees. Second one is personnel, and then the third one's non-personnel updates. I'm going to pull up slides, which you all got in your packet too on the building user fees. And what I did was put together all the materials of what we've been talking about so far. I'm going to turn this into a slideshow. Let me see if that works. Is the slideshow working for you? Yes. Okay, good.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks. So just a little bit of a recap of everybody's memories. So this was the chart that we had looked at on February 8th, which was the first time we talked about this. And this is something that Matt had worked on with my input and looking at rates historically, both for the different programs and going forwards. And if anyone is having a hard time seeing this, that bit.ly link will actually take you to the exact file on the PSB website where you can see this in detail. So I just want to sort of refresh what we were doing here, right? This was thinking about representing a change from a per square foot charge overall to, which was for what was going on for extended days, to an overall charge to increase clarity. It was a reflection of the significantly increased cost of building operations and maintenance, which we're all experiencing and talking about over in capital for the most part. And then following that presentation, the extended day directors submitted a preference for a per student charge based on their program size. So this is actually the what we then looked at our last meeting, which was 2 weeks ago. They had provided some really helpful information on their operating budget, the number of students they have certified, the number that enrolled. Matt had provided the rental fees, the square footage, their rate per square foot, which was based on a calculation relating to the number of, it was basically a rate that was adjusted by the number of free and reduced lunch students in the district, but not in that school district, but not necessarily in the programs themselves. And then you could see sort of their rent as a % of their revenue. And then last week, or I should say 2 weeks ago, we looked at some of the potentials for per student costs, which is what they had requested. They had said, please don't charge us on an hourly basis. Like, let's link it to our students because that is really what's the revenue driver for them. And it makes it easier for them to plan and understand what's going on. So the other thing we had talked about at our meeting was this idea of doing proportional rent offsets. So for example, any programs that had students who are on a partial or full scholarship or vouchers, that we would reduce the rent accordingly. And then the other thing that we had talked about was basically thinking about how to put guardrails around the spaces they receive, so that now that it's being delinked from square footage, they don't get too little square footage, they don't get too much, and also making sure that like they have some more guarantees around that. Their feedback, they were supportive of this model. It's the model that they had proposed. They asked for 2 things. One was to change it to the number of enrolled children versus their EEC capacity. model. And some of them, for example, I'll show you at Heath, you can see where they have 180 certifications, 180 certified students possible, but actually only have 86 students due to a confluence of factors. And so for them, for example, that would be it's a particularly huge gap between actual and certification. And so they would end up heavily cost burdened by the EEC number. Most of the programs are closer, but again, it's sort of that was one thing that they requested. And then also they discussed, they agreed with this idea of thinking about families who, as they put it, through the poorly state-funded voucher system and number of families that qualify for tuition assistance, which was basically reaffirming what we talked about here about partial and full scholarships or vouchers. But then also they talked about that some of these programs accept students that require significant additional support, and how to somehow recognize that and to provide either PSB providing the additional support for those students or providing some sort of rent offset. So those were the two things that they reflected back. So I'm going to put up the next slide, and this is a proposal for the committee to discuss. So the idea would be that there's this is the per student charge based on their actual number of students for this year. So you could see that I've done it at $100, $125, and $150, but I'm proposing that we use the $125 and we base it on, just like we have our October 1st freeze data that we ask them for their October 1st numbers. And the rental fees on average would increase 15%. However, their total rent right now is 1.76% of revenue, and it would only go up to 2.04% on average of revenue. So it is a very small increase in their total revenue, less than 0.3% to address some of these costs. And then furthermore, it could be even lower because as we think about which programs may have students who are, again, on some sort of tuition assistance, like the vouchers, the scholarships, that we would reduce those fees further. And again, they would provide us that on based on their October 1st enrollment and then their October 1st attendance. And then regarding the issue that was brought up, I'm suggesting that possibly that be something that policy take up with the Office of Student Services, Office of Teaching and Learning, and BEEP, which is something about how that they can be providing, how PSB should be equitably interacting with all the different after-school programs that take in children, that accept children with significant needs and or preschoolers. Because those are something that vary significantly by program and affect their ability to financially survive. So I guess my motion would be that we, just for the extended day user fees, that we change the structure to $125 per student for the upcoming year. I'm gonna take unless people, does the subcommittee want this slide to stay up, or do you want to take it down so we can see each other? Because I can't see you all.
Leave it up.
I'm
Leave it
asking
up.
a question.
Okay,
If-
go ahead. I can't see anything, so go
Yeah,
ahead and
that's
talk.
okay. I'm not trying. You like that, huh, Maria? So since we're negotiating all these rents and costs, I wonder if we can't try to encourage by some bennies like you've done vouchers, because only one school right now takes vouchers. And I'm wondering if there's a way that you get $115 rent if you accept vouchers.
Well, I think the
And
effect,
maybe vouchers and pre-K if it's in your school.
the effect of that, I think basically you do get a per student reduction in practice, because we do not charge you for the students who are on vouchers. Like, it's proportionally reduced. If you have a student on voucher,
$100 is, yeah, $100 or $200 is not going to make a big difference. If it's the percentage, $25 for everybody, that certainly makes a big difference. Right now, we're getting 117,000 in. Is that what the amount is today?
118,800.
100, oh, I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yeah, that's okay. So this
So
would be
even at
100,
100, it goes up.
even at 100, it does go, no, it doesn't go up. At 100, it
It's
would be
100.
lower.
It's
At
100.
100, it would be it would be
It's not
110,000.
Can
Am I
I
reading this
can I
wrong?
jump the queue to follow up? It's just I want to make sure I
Sure.
understand what this is about. So Mariah, if I understand your proposal, like, if there were a student who were on a full scholarship, then essentially the program would not be charged at all for rent, like because of that student. If they were on half scholarship, they would be charged like half of the 125. Is that what this means?
My calculation is sort of down here at the bottom. So so for example, if you have, like I said, if a program has 180 students, 2 are full scholarship and 2 are half scholarship and 1 is voucher at 60%, then the charge is reduced by 3.6
Yeah.
divided by 180.
Right. So someone
So
on
it's
a free
fractional.
ride, basically the program doesn't get charged any rent at all for that student.
Correct, for that
Yeah.
student.
So Helen, I don't know whether that being the case, what you're suggesting is even needed.
Helen's saying she would reduce it by even more. I think we need
Even
to.
more than
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, well, she's
Well,
saying
it's
she would
not
reduce the
100%.
$125 per student to like $115 per student. And I think that we're trying to still maintain the increased, we're trying to have some sort of increase here because we have increased cost of building and operations, but we also don't want to penalize people who.
Even 120, I think, would make a difference.
So Helen, you mean that we would not charge for the student who's on the full scholarship, and for all the other students, we would charge
Right,
less
Helen
for each of
wants
them
to.
as well.
Helen wants to charge less for.
Oh, I see. Okay.
To
Yeah,
encourage them to take more.
I get it. Okay.
That's my thought, but maybe that's not the right carrot. And to encourage them, and in order to receive it, they would also, if there's a pre-K in the building, they would have to service pre-K. Maybe it's too complicated.
I feel worried about, I mean, I'm not sure I'm ready to vote on that today. And I feel like that's a whole change in their
You have to
practice.
negotiate that. I mean,
Yeah, that's a big change in practice that I'm not ready to take on today. And that's why I think that the policy about I think that if we had a policy that talked about the support that they get, because I think a lot of them, for example, might consider preschoolers, but it's very difficult because of the additional staffing, or for example, children in the RISE program or other children who might need one-to-one aids during the day. Those programs are then possibly needing to hire additional staff to support those children. And that's, again, complicated. I'm not saying they're not accepting those students now, but it's an additional cost burden, and some programs are getting that support and some programs aren't. And how do we make sure that we're providing that equitably across the programs? So, but I don't think that's a finance thing. I think that is a student services, teaching and learning BEEP issue. So I don't want to touch that here. Are there other comments from the subcommittee, particularly on this particular proposal?
Yeah, Mariah, I mean, I'm just thinking what Helen's saying, but in terms of their overall cost, and the rental per student is very low, really. So it's not really much of an incentive one way or the other to add children on scholarship. They have to cover that cost, and they have to cover 98% of that cost somehow.
Yep.
So I'm not sure, Helen, that's really an incentive for the programs to bring more kids in. I mean, I think that's a good thought, but I don't think that they still have to cover 98% of the cost for the kid. Right.
To me, those topics, like what you're saying, to incentivize that requires different conversations. I don't think doing it through this mechanism is the right way to.
You're probably right. I take it back. It was just a thought.
No, I mean, it's important and we want to encourage it. But as Suzanne says, the 98% of the cost is where there's much more going on there than just the rent. So.
Can I ask one other question of this?
Of course.
I'm confused why some schools will end up paying 116% more, whereas others, I understand the reduction.
This has to do with like the question of
how many kids they have.
Not how many kids they have. It has to do with Lincoln, for example, has a lot of students who are free and reduced lunch in the district, Matt, correct me if I get any of this wrong, not necessarily in the program, but in the district. And so their historical per square footage rate has been much lower.
I get it.
And so it's distorted because they've been paying a very low rate. I'll go back to the previous slide. You can see the per square foot rates. They vary. The lowest one is
Yeah.
about 3 times lower than the highest one. So
Yeah.
that's why you see as we change from, and you can see their percentage of rent as a portion of their revenue also varies wildly. If you go to this new model, percent of revenue, it's 2% on average, but the percentage actually becomes much, much tighter. It goes now, the lowest one is 1.77 and the highest one's 2.26. It's much closer to that because it's tied to the number of students that they actually have enrolled. So it eliminates a huge amount of that variability. We'll have 1 year where they have this change, although it's a small dollar amount for them in aggregate. And then it really ties very closely to their enrollment.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
Okay, are there other comments from the subcommittee? Do we want to take a vote on this? How do we want to proceed? We don't have to take a vote on it. We can wait and you can think about it longer. And I can't see anyone, so you should just talk.
Hi, Maria. I just have a question. So when you're talking about a policy around this, are you talking about a broader policy around rental fees that would not only encompass extended day, but base or essentially anything?
No, it's not a policy about buildings. The policy is about the support that is offered to after-school programs in terms of staffing when they take in children who have significant additional needs, whether those are related to age or disability or anything else. And so, because it turns out that some programs get support from the district and some programs don't, and it's not clear when or why. And so how do we get, whether it's policy, whether it's a guideline that's issued by staff, how we do that equitably?
In terms of the timing for this, do you think that this should wait until after there's a contract with Unit C, or that it should inform our negotiations with Unit C, given the implications for paraprofessionals?
I think that might be something you want to talk about with the deputies in Linus, but I'm not sure that they need to. I think that this is something that is a much longer term thing. It's not necessarily tied to any specific moment in time. This has been something that's been an issue for a while, and it's not like directly related to the contractor or this decision on the dollars.
And it seems to me it would be good to have this conversation first with them before I mean, there may be people listening in now, but to at least have this conversation first before we determine anything.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just an opportunity for you all to talk about it and see what makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Mariah, do we charge at all for enrichment programs after school?
That's coming next on the next slide. This is just the extended days for now.
Okay.
Yep. So does the subcommittee want to vote on this, or do we want to park it until our next meeting?
So have the directors of the EDs have seen this?
They haven't seen the $125 rate. They've seen everything else. Previously, if you recall, I had 100, 150, 200, 250. This does reflect their comments back. They actually asked if we could have an $80 rate, and I said, but that would mean you're paying less than you're paying now. They said, oh, okay, never mind. So we hadn't done the math out. So they've seen most of this, yes.
I'm going to vote that we make sure that we have full transparency before we vote on this.
Okay.
That's
So you don't want to vote today. That's fine.
Sorry,
don't.
Nancy, what is not transparent currently?
We need to get buy-in from, we do have buy-in, but let's get the 125 past the EDs. And I felt like there are questions unanswered. That could be a rule. It was just a suggestion.
I think that that's reasonable. We can, well, I don't know if any of them are here today because I can't see the attendees, but we can always share the.
Kathy.
Okay. But I don't want to make Kathy speak on behalf of the group too until they've consulted. So, so again, we can have that. I think that your point is well taken, Nancy, and I think it's totally fine. And we can defer this until the next meeting. I just want to go over the other areas. There's much more here. So the other groups that are affected and are in this chart. So base, we've discussed this with Michelle and Grace and Michelle McGlone, Michelle Herman, Grace Y, and Arthur Conquest. There's been emails back and forth about how to deal with base rental charges. And it just comes back to this question of, is base part of PSB or not? And how do we consider programs like, and it's not just base, we've been talking about it for athletics also, right? We talked about how to address some of the additional cost that happens for those programs. Like I have here, custodial, security, equipment wear and tear, which are part of PSB and occur after hours or intensive. And if we don't charge those fees, where does the funding for that to cover the additional cost for base come from? And then one thing that I've been thinking about is, do we differentiate? Base has a very low, like something like a $10 registration fee right now. And so do we differentiate between some sort of registration fee that is higher for residents versus non-residents, online versus in-person classes? And the third thing, or the fourth thing is, do we think about, again, base is in rebuilding mode post-COVID. We've deferred their building user fees for several years now. And do we defer, do we again decide not to charge building user fees to base for another year? Michelle's asked that we meet later on. She and Ruth are going to meet, I think it's in the next couple of weeks, to talk through some of these issues, look what the current base funding balance is, and come back to us. So certainly anyone who in the subcommittee who wants to express opinions on these things can now, but also none of this is going to be voted on or discussed today, unless you want to bring it up. And then enrichment programs, DASEP, which is at Ruff and Ridley, was the only enrichment program being charged, but it actually turns out that there's several others in the district that do exist as standalone nonprofits, but there was some confusion about their actual program status. Some people, there was apparently they were volunteer based only and then converted to official nonprofits. Anyways, they're now, that's being investigated to see who should be charged for the building space. And I did speak to Lauren Bernard, who's the DASEP program director, several times over the past week about this. And my initial thought had been something like what we originally proposed in the hourly fees here. And it sounds like she actually thinks that that is probably reasonable. So really thinking about their specific rooms that they're using and the specific hours, because her program doesn't run year round. It's not like these programs where it has a specific numbers. It sort of has sessions and varies. And I think that's true for all the enrichment programs. So it makes sense probably to have an hourly based model like we proposed, but she's going to confirm and get back. And I think Matt is starting to talk to, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, to some of the other enrichment programs too. So we can get some more feedback from people.
Yep,
I think
that's correct.
Brookline Music School, Elizabeth is here, and I don't know if Elizabeth, or she was here. I can't see who's here anymore. I don't know if you have any feedback you want to provide on the fly, or if you want to wait and provide some written feedback offline after the meeting. Either way is fine. And I can't see her, and I don't know if she's still here. So if you're here and want to, okay.
Betsy, we can't hear you, Betsy. No, you're still muted.
There we go. Sorry about that. So I'm Betsy Frauenthal. I'm the executive director of the music school. I'm happy to provide something in writing. Matt and I did speak this afternoon, and he reviewed the spreadsheet with me, and it all looks reasonable to us. So I can send you something more formal.
Okay, thank you so much. And then the last area was what I'm calling just other. There's a sort of current practice of charging 0% to town departments and PTOs. And Matt and I discussed this, but basically the principal user of PSB space is rec in exchange, and they don't charge us for fields, and we don't charge them. The idea is to sort of like a net zero between the two. We don't charge them for gyms and such, and they don't charge us for fields. And other than that, the town department usage is very low. And so that's one thing. Do we want to continue that? And then the other one is PTOs. And the idea is basically the PTOs are generating funds for the school use anyway. So it's essentially, if we were to charge the PTOs, that would just be funds that they're not spending on the school. So it seems again like a wash and perhaps not needed, but it would be good to have the committee confirm that they agree with that that practice.
So
Does
just
anyone-
as a note with
Yeah.
that, no charge. If custodial overtime is needed for the event, weekends, or there's food being served for some function after school, we do charge the other town departments or the PTOs, and they've always paid it.
Thanks.
Also-
Go ahead.
I'd like
Also,
to comment that I think that what we've been doing, and I agree with the way we've been doing it, the PTOs. I don't love the idea of making money off the PTOs. Do you know what I mean? I think it's hard enough for them to organize a lot of these events, and I think that, you know, business as usual, in my opinion, is fine.
Okay, Helen.
Yeah, just as an FYI to the committee that's here, last summer, Nancy O'Connor, the head of Parks and Rec, and I were talking, and she brought up the issue of this memorandum of agreement that we've had with Parks and Rec for years. I think it goes back to the 80s, even before my time. And so they wanted to update it, and I think there was some work done on it, but I don't know where it went to, but just as an FYI for people to know that.
Thanks, Helen. And I realized I didn't show the last slide. I just want to highlight that there's been a couple small changes since the last time we presented this on the 8th, and they're highlighted here. One is that we realized that elementary cafeteria was not a category, and so we added that in, and then clarified that the cafeteria charges were from a flat charge to an hourly charge. Go ahead, Helen.
I can't really see this very well, but I'm just
I know,
wondering.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. The new spaces that we have that are really coveted,
Mm-hmm.
the auditorium or the multipurpose room at Ridley, the STEM Commons, the Lincoln Auditorium, and the really nice spots. Have we raised the rates on those substantially? And should
They're higher than like the BHS auditorium, the 22 tap-in room. They're high, sort of high, like in keeping, like the atrium and the 22 tap-in conference room are the same price. The multi-purpose room at Ruffin Ridley is pretty big, like is also pretty high. You can look at these prices if you want. And this will be circulated afterwards, and you can see if you think that any should be adjusted.
Okay, so you're not voting on them today?
No, I don't think we're going to, because I think it's a lot for people, and I want us to make sure we talk about the personnel stuff.
Okay.
Next. Okay, I'm going to toggle over. Any other comments on this, or people feel comfortable pushing this conversation off to the 29th?
I'm good.
Okay, Andy, Suzanne, you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is personnel. Oops, I hate when I do that. Let's try that again. Okay, so here's the agenda for the personnel bit. First is a refresher on what we did last year, then an overview of FY24, a comparison with other districts, and then impact of override on personnel. So last year, for anyone who was here, you saw these charts, which were a comparison both from FY22 to FY23, thinking about the town allocation in all funds, thinking about FTEs and dollars. And this was a huge amount of work for the personnel personnel budget manager to pull together. But it was really helpful thinking about how much of our staff is student-facing educators versus building-based or staff support versus central administration. I found it very helpful, and I think the feedback from the committee for people who were here last year was also that it was helpful. However, we have staffing shortages in A&F this year, and so we haven't done this yet for this year. I'm not sure that we will have it for this year given the staffing situation, but I do hope that we'll have that level of detail for future years. So I just want people to see that and know that it's something that we did in the past and aim to do again, though possibly not at with the current configuration of people that we have and time we have available to that. But I do just want to point out that in the FY24 budget, I'm going to go into this for a minute, for the town allocation, the budget book did talk about the town allocation, the proposed for FY24 versus the FY23 actual. And that I just want to highlight that there's just an increase of 2.0, which is the custodians for the larger Driscoll building, which has been discussed over many years and has been planned. So if we go into the FY24 budget, I want to give a little bit, and if anyone has questions or comments, just interrupt me because I can't see hands or anything. If we go into the FY24 budget, you've seen some of these slides before, but I just thought it was appropriate to bring them back up. The operating budget staff by classification. So you can see this, there's about 4% that are in district leadership and school leadership. And then underneath that, you can see the other breakdown of the balance of the just over or just around the 1,200 balance of staff. And of the other 1,200 or so staff, it's about 96% of, which is about that 1,200 number, is unionized. So important to understand what's going on in our overall budget and how the impact of contracts really does affect what's going on. Because as you can see from this one, which you've seen before, personnel costs are the vast majority of the budget at 87.4%. One other slide, which I think is important as we think about personnel, is that the staffing has really tracked very closely to our enrollment trends. So you can see the educator DESE educator data, which in the first 3 years, that's the actual data. And I'll talk in a minute about the definition of educator, but as you can see, it basically doesn't include some categories such as custodial staff, but includes the vast majority. And then as you can see in 22-23, this is the numbers that have been submitted but not yet verified by DESE. So it's 1,270.77, which is just about 92% of that 1,378.4 number. And again, we have 91% of students. So 92% of educators, 91% of students. This was actually provided in the budget book. These are the tables that we have on staffing, and I'm going to go through them one by one. So you can see again that 1,245 number from last year and the 1,247 number and the cost here. This is from table 4D in the budget book that you all received. And the categories of staff that are in these areas, so schools is the K-5 classroom teachers, the K-1 classroom paras, and then building administration, which also includes general building aides and secretaries. The teaching and learning area, and I just want to highlight that the schools is about 445, so it's a little bit more than a third of the total here. Teaching and learning, that includes grades 6 through 12 subject area teachers. So even though you might have an English teacher who is in the middle school, they're actually in this teaching and learning and not the schools area. I believe is how the calculation goes. Basically, if you're a specialist as opposed to a generalist, you're in this area. Literacy and math specialists and coaches are in teaching and learning. Curriculum coordinators and secretaries are supporting the curriculum coordinators are all in this teaching and learning bucket. Student services, which is health services, special education, educators, guidance, social workers, psychologists, those are all in the student services bucket. And I just want to highlight that this is again more than a third of the total. There's a significant number of people here. I think often people focus on just the classroom teachers, and they need to understand that there are significant bodies of work going across 3 domains here. And then the last area, district departments, and that includes things like custodial, food services, admin and finance, HR, et cetera. So this is the breakdown by schools. And you can see again how that breaks down. I'm not necessarily going to talk in detail about any of these things other than if people have questions, but I just want people to see what this looks like and that there is quite a bit of detail. If you go to if you go into the budget book, you can actually see this, for example, this 25.49 and exactly which positions are included in that breakdown. I haven't obviously recreated all of that here, but you can see those details. Same thing for Office of Teaching and Learning, or for Teaching and Learning, and then you can see again the office versus every single one of the subdomain areas, and you can see if you go to the budget book, you can see all the detail of who is in exactly which of these buckets and what these staffing lines represent. Third area for student services, same thing. You can see the office itself versus all of the different areas that are practiced here. And then same thing again for the district departments. And you can again see here. And I just want to highlight that in all of these other slides, everything was the same FY23 to FY24. The only difference here is in the admin and finance, and that actually contains the school operations team, which contains custodial, and that's where you see that 2.0 FTE increase. Any questions on any of that before I go on? Or comments? Okay. So comparison with other districts. This is a staffing comparison using DESI data that I thought people would find interesting. So the last year that's publicly available for DESI data is 21-22. The 22-23, I'm sorry, obviously the 22-23 data is not available yet. So this is last year. So if you actually take the data that's available and work on it, you can see that Brookline has a student educator ratio of 5.33. And I did some histograms here, so you can see that there's about 20 districts of that 399 that have less than 4 students to educators, student to educator ratio. And you can see that Brookline is in this third bucket here at a 5.33 student to educator ratio. And we're actually number 78 out of 399. So certainly not a very high number, but also certainly not the lowest by any means. And student to teacher ratio, again, preparing a histogram based on the data and looking at the different, the 399 districts and looking at their student to teacher ratio. Brookline's at 11.04 students per teacher, and that is number 143 out of 399. So just about a little above the midpoint, but pretty close to the midpoint in terms of the total number of districts. And then in terms of just the difference with, go ahead.
Now, something that I think is an important fact.
Yeah.
Last year, we did not downsize as much the staff as we might have been able to, because we knew kids were behind and we needed to have good ratios in order for them to help kids to catch up. And as you pointed out in one of your previous slides, we've even lowered the number of teachers for this year, even though the number of students have gone up a bit.
Yep, that's right. And that's actually something I'll talk a little bit more about. This is last year's data. No, you didn't, but I think it's a good point. Like, this is last year's data, not this year's data. So it's important to highlight. And I just, for people who don't know the difference between educator and teacher, which I wanted a little bit of clarity on this earlier myself. So educators includes other staff categories like administrators, paras, counselors, librarians, nurses, psychologists, social workers. I think that captured all of the domains, but there might have been 1 or 2. But you can see that you can get the sense of the holistic definition of educators versus the teacher number. And so I think you're right, Helen, that I think, you know, that these numbers reflect a commitment, but also don't show that we are certainly at some egregiously low number that is out of line with districts around the state. As you can see, we're sort of in, you know, reasonable to some, you know, mid-range, I would say, of what's going on in personnel ratios.
Yes.
Let's see if I can get this. Okay, so then I wanted to drill down because these are districts that we've benchmarked ourselves against in other comparison situations. And so we're sort of at the lower end, but we're not the lowest on these. And I just, again, want to bring up Helen's point that our FY23 staffing, we know, has been further reduced. We don't know, this is all operating off of last year's data. So we don't necessarily have the data for 22-23 yet. our peer districts yet to be able to do this analysis, a comparison analysis for the current year. But you can see that Brookline is at the lower, but not the lowest of our peer districts that we've used, or other adjacent districts, Boston and Cambridge. Any questions on this or comments? Okay. And then this is exactly that point, Helen. This data is just on previous comparison data, and we don't have the updated data. Okay, last section is the impact of the override on personnel. You all have seen varying, this is a version of the slides that you've seen before. So this is the current proposed FY24 budget with the 25 and 26. And there's new rows in here talking about the personnel impact. So our FY24 personnel budget is 1247, which again reflects the 2.0 from the FY23, which is the Driscoll custodial we've discussed. There is a programmatic adjustment in here where we do not have the FTE impact of that yet. But as we go through the new categories of the new initiatives, you can actually see the FTE impacts of those. So BEEP is a plus 5.58 FTEs starting in FY25, but that is offset by the projected increased tuition. So that hasn't necessarily been calculated in as a cost. Athletics has 1.5 starting in FY24 and 1.0 and an additional 1.0 in FY25, as well as some additional days for the staff that are in Unit B that are funded off of, whose salaries are calculated off of days worked. Student Services has the 2.0 staff. That's the pre-K through 8 special education director and the nurse that we've talked about in previous meetings. The South Brookline no-fee bus has no staff component to it, it's just services. And then the World Language Redesign is a 1.0 starting next year. So that total is 11.08 FTE, but only 5.5 of those are expected from the LEA because the other 5.58, as I said, are looking at being offset by BEEP tuition. And then just highlighting some of the other impacts here. So without the override funding with the $3.7 million operating gap, there would be significant personnel reductions. So the new initiatives would not be funded, which is the 5.5 FTE. We'd have to make significant changes to staffing to close the remaining $3 million gap. So that's about 39 FTE, just using one example. This isn't necessarily the exact structure, but one example of if we are looking at Unit A teachers, that would be about 39 of them. And then there would, of course, be the follow-on impacts from that, the class sizes, the caseloads, the program reductions, and then just highlighting that there's already an additional $1.85 million in reductions. And as we said in the previous slide, there's no FTE that is pointed to here yet, but we just want to emphasize that there would almost certainly be, because our budget is overwhelmingly personnel, certainly it would be expected that in that first year there would be personnel impacts. And then with the override funding, of course, we would be able to retain our status as one of the best school districts. But again, I just want to highlight that there will still be some FTE impacts to the programmatic adjustments. And with that, there's backup slides on the new initiatives if people had questions on them. But otherwise, it's just time for discussion on personnel. Any questions people have?
That was really interesting analysis, Mariah. That was really helpful.
Great, I'm glad you found it useful. Suzanne?
Yeah, I really like looking at the student to educator ratio and the student to teacher ratio and where we fall in that. I mean, I think sometimes we get accused of having more staff than we need, but we're not out of line at all. And anyway, I think that's a good piece to follow up on to see what the data for this year is going to be, and to have people understand that. I think those are important data to understand.
Ruth or Linus, do you know when DESE publishes the, I know you submitted it several months ago, right? Maybe in January. Do you know when it actually gets gets validated? It's going to take a while, right? Am I remembering right?
It will take a little bit more time. How are you tonight? But no, I don't know the exact date when it goes live.
Okay. Andy, go ahead, and then Carolyn.
Yeah, I don't know whether we have the information to answer this, but I'm curious. So our student to teacher ratio is middling, but our student to educator ratio is relatively low. Is that because we have a relatively large number of paraprofessionals, or because we have lots of administrators or people in other categories?
I think we could do a deeper dive on that. The DESE website, they provide data in painfully separate. They don't provide like one massive data set. You have to like go assemble your data. That was like 3 or 4 different data sets that I had to merge using district codes as the matching tool. So so I think one could do that analysis, but it would require an additional layer. And I can go look and see if it's easy to see that.
And it also connects with how it's reported in SIMS, the EPIMS reports, as well as the Student Information Systems reports, in terms of how students are connected to educator and caseloads and or teacher classes as well. So, for example, if a teacher has 5 kids on the caseload compared to one teacher with 25, so those pairings also then factor into that as well. So it's not a simple, straightforward, we calculate it on our end, but there are multiple layers that go into those calculations. And as Mariah said, it is quite interesting how they shoot out or spit out their data from what we submit.
Thanks, Linus. Carolyn. Oh, Carolyn, go ahead.
Actually, sorry,
Oh.
I'm very, very sorry. My sincerest apologies. I have to go.
Okay.
Thanks everyone. See you soon.
Thanks,
Or
Nancy.
speak to you soon. Okay, see you tomorrow.
Bye. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Thanks. I'm curious about the additional 2 FTEs in custodial services for the new Driscoll, and just kind of how that fits into the whole picture. And I have a few specific questions. You were saying that was planned and known for a few years. So when was there the same kind of addition of custodial FTEs when FRR opened at a larger size, and BHS? And what is the plan in that respect as part of the Pierce project planning? And I'm also just curious how do you come up with two? Is that like square footage or?
Sure.
And I know
Matt,
it's a little bit separate, but I'm hearing a lot of concern through advisory subcommittees about unexpectedly high repair and maintenance and utility costs. So I know that's not part of personnel, but it's in that sort of like new, larger, more complex buildings.
I haven't seen any data on that. And if you have data on it, perhaps you could share it with the school's subcommittee or the school committee, because I'm not sure that, I don't know if Helen's seen it, but I certainly haven't seen it. It looks like Helen hasn't seen it either. So perhaps you have better data than we do that we've requested and haven't gotten.
Andy, were you at that meeting last night where the $100,000 at the high school? I mean,
why don't we put this aside because it sounds more complicated and we're running short on time, but let's come back to it. And Matt, what can you answer the question on custodial over time for new projects and how that's how the FTE is determined?
Yeah, so the custodial FTE is largely determined on like the square footage of the building. So Ridley, for example, almost doubled in size from the old building that was designed as for 3 sections to a 5 section. And we went from 4 custodians to 5 when we moved out into 2 separate buildings. and we added another one when we started, so that they went to 6. The high school, based on the square footage added, we added 3 custodians, 1 at STEM, 2 at 22 Tappan, because we took 2 from the high school and put them at the old Lincoln School while the 9th grade was there. And so for Driscoll, which was right around 100,000 square feet, the new building will be 145 with more floors than the old building. So the type of cleaning and things will be done. We're going to go to 4 custodians. The 2 was kind of light, but because it was an older building and different types of floors, some things are easier to clean than others, but they might not always be more durable. The Driscoll is kind of an anomaly. We had rubber stair treads, wood floor, linoleum, VCT, and carpet. Most buildings don't have that kind of different.
And slate stairs.
And slate stairs.
I
that
think
Helen's
it sounds
disappointed
like-
we're not keeping.
I think it sounds like we got the answer to Carolyn's question about increases in custodial.
I also asked what the plan is for Pierce in terms of increased custodial with the new plan.
First, let's get a building. And then we can make a
I
plan.
said that the Driscoll was known for several years and it was part of the plan, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, it's been, since I've been on school committee, it's been discussions of having the which was after the Driscoll vote. But this is not the first year we've talked about Driscoll. I think we talked about it last year and the year before. And we talked about BHS last year for, well, actually last year and the year before for the building that opened and then the other portion of the building. So yeah, these have been going on.
I want to point out that Pierce wouldn't open until 2027, which is beyond the horizon even of the override that we're contemplating. So,
although we have been talking about
part of
the
maintenance
staffing and
costs in the future. So I was
we have been talking, but I don't think we have the final answers for you yet, Carolyn.
And the practice is to increase when we need to and do it by square footage and do it equitably among the schools. So there would be no reason we would do something differently at Pierce than we do at the other ones that are new. And now after this whole conversation, I had a really important point to make, but I lost it. What were you talking about before, Carolyn?
We were talking about personnel.
We talked a little bit about student teacher ratios,
Educators versus
educator ratio.
teachers, and the why educators is different than teachers. That could be something. Yeah. If it
I'm
comes back
sorry.
to you, go ahead. That's okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Yeah, well, I was actually going to talk about a little bit about what Annie was saying. I think it's worth looking at taking a deeper dive into this educator ratio, a student to educator ratio, because I think there are some things we offer that are unique and really makes our program strong, such as paras in kindergartens and first grade. That's not necessarily district common in a lot of districts. And so, and you know, again, looking at our special ed programs and the personnel and staff we offer, speech and language, OT, PT, adaptive PE. So I think we took a closer look, we would be able to find exactly why the ratio is what it is, and it might be worth doing.
My hypothesis is that with in-district programming, you probably see your educator ratio, and that programs, that districts which are sending more kids out of district would have a more similar educator to student ratio as teacher to student ratio because of the,
Right.
so you're investing in one area and not investing in the other area. So that's my hypothesis, but I don't.
It's probably
yeah.
right. It's probably worth just taking a quick look. I don't know how quick it is, but.
It's not quick. That's the thing.
Okay, that's the thing. Well,
Thank you, Desi,
okay.
for this complicated data query. But yeah, go ahead, Catherine.
Thank you, Mariah. I just wanted to follow up on Carolyn's questions and just, are you saying that in the Pierce budget, that increase in personnel is not included and that needs to be something we need to think about as a town? Or are you saying that those numbers are in there and you just don't have them at your fingertips?
Well, for the next year, they're not included. Remember, this building isn't
That's
coming
not till
live.
2027, I
Right,
understand
and
that.
so this is multiple years out. It's not within the horizon that we're talking about. However, it has been a discussion of how to handle that with the because of the override horizon being a 3-year, the Pierce building not being online until the 4th year of that. And how do we make sure that we account for and plan for the building costs? But
And wait, I just want to
Bill-
follow up because I thank you. That was good information, but I didn't understand if you gave me a yes or a no.
there's
Is-
no Pierce building cost in
Yeah.
FY24.
No,
Well,
that wasn't my question. In the Pierce budget.
You're talking about the capital project budget?
You're talking about the debt exclusion?
The
Catherine?
debt exclusions for the capital project, not for operating costs.
So the budgets that we've seen for Pierce, and I guess what I'm guessing is the answer is no. So
Those
thank
are
you.
capital project budgets, though.
Yes, I understand that.
Okay.
Thank you.
If I
Yep.
can help you, what we have done to sort of make this more of a gradual shift is when the students move out of the building, we're going to be in 2 sites. So there'll probably be a necessity at that point or the following year to have 1 extra custodian. That would sort of cover the extra square footage that might be available, although with the way Pierce is, it may be the same square footage, just easier to clean. I'm not sure.
I want to bring this
But I
part of the
remember-
conversation to a close because we've got one
I-
more thing to talk about, but go ahead.
Can I just there was one point and I remembered what it was. The DESE numbers people need to remember are from October. We traditionally enroll kids all year round and our numbers go up. Linus, you can help me with this year, but I know since October till now, I think our numbers are up 60 kids maybe, Linus?
Yeah, when we looked at February, we were at just shy of 7,100 in-district kids. But again, that as you're saying, that the numbers go up and down throughout the course of the year, but we are above where we were last. We have more kids enrolled now than we did in January.
So
in October.
What my point was that we have to allow for that. And so sometimes also that isn't factored into the teacher-student ratio, that piece. That along with the fact that, like you said, Mariah, we have a number of in-district programs that A, are better for students, and B, are more cost-effective for the district. So that was my point.
Thank you. Ruth, do you have any updates on the non-personnel bits for FY24 that we had discussed at our last meeting that you want to share, or should we hold those?
Well, the only question was you wanted a recap of the out of district tuition. Linus, I sent you that slide. Can you pull it up?
Sure thing. Give me just a second.
So for everyone who might not have been there, might not remember, this was the discussion about how to, rather than having circuit breaker shown as an expense, it should be shown on the revenue, and then the circuit breaker allocated across the different types of out of district programming.
Thank you, Linus. So what I did is I then reallocated the cost. Now the distribution of the circuit breaker is based on the prior year experience, because I don't actually have the exact detail how the budget for FY24 and FY23 was actually built. But I did take a look at some of the costs that have, the way we have reported it on the end of the year report in terms of percentages of where the circuit breaker was actually allocated. And this is how it comes out for FY23 and the FY24 budget.
Thank you. Any questions from anyone on this?
Yes, how many students are we talking about for this budget?
Again, I don't have that exact number. I have to do try and get a recap to rebuild, but historically from FY20, 21, and 22, it's averaged out to 76 students per year that are placed out.
Okay, thank you.
I want to say I heard somewhere, and Ruth, I could be wrong, or Linus, correct me, that we had that there's some students graduating this year, which is part of the offset, which was why we don't see necessarily realized here in the total cost the full 14% from the state. Am I remembering correctly? Does that, Linus, am I? Ruth, does that sound? Yeah.
Okay. That's correct. We actually have there is one student that I know for sure that is aging out, who's turning 22 in a very costly program, and that's definitely has is part of it. And there are also several students who will be graduating. And that sort of has fallen to our advantage because the FY24 numbers do in fact include the 14% increase that was given to the out of district private schools for their tuition increases.
Thank you. That's helpful context. Okay, we're at time. I see Catherine, your hand's up. I'm going to give you 30 seconds and then I love to end my meetings on time.
I understand. Thank you. Just quickly, do you have that breakdown by school or by race, that percentage out?
You mean, do we provide which schools people attend? No.
Is that something you can get, or is that just something you didn't even look at?
Great, but are you talking about from which school they're going or from which school they're going to?
Well, they're coming from.
Why
It's
would
not
you-
done that
what
way.
difference does it make?
Just curious about the
You
breakdown.
could, it's like asking where they live because they're not necessarily ever going to a school. You know, some kids just come out of preschool and they're placed in out of district programs.
I'm sorry, this isn't a good time to have this conversation. What you're telling me is that we don't have it.
We could identify
That's-
where students go, but it's not necessarily meaningful in terms of why they got placed.
Got it.
Where they
Thank
got
you.
placed.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for this. Subcommittee members, just one final note. We talked about a March 29th meeting, and Betsy has sent you an email to see whether you can attend that date. And hopefully we'll be able to then draw some conclusions on the building user fees, get some more information, and have other budget updates as needed. So thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, Mariah.
Bye.
Bye.